Welcome to the Book Nook, where the Lorehounds, your guides to the archipelago of Earthsea. I'm David.
I'm John.
And I'm Marilyn. And this is part 2 of our coverage of the third book of the Earthsea series, The Farthest Shore by Ursula K. LeGuin.
We're starting from chapter 6 through the end with the last 8 chapters. You can find a link to part 1 in the show notes.
We're going to start off with some spoiler-free conversation about our thoughts on the book in general. Following a quick break, we'll move into a deeper discussion about the major themes presented, as well as discussing the main plot points, followed by listener feedback.
While we enjoy discussing the book amongst ourselves, we also want to hear from you. Send us email to book@thelorehounds.com or visit us on our website at thelorehounds.com/contact. And there you can either use the contact form or use the nifty voicemail feature. You just click a button and record a message, and then that'll get sent to us and we can drop it into the next episode. As well, we've got a Discord server, so join us there.
We have a terrific community, very welcoming and a lot of fun, and a specifically dedicated channel for Earthsea conversations. Again, there's a link in the show notes below.
If you're enjoying this or any of our other podcasts, please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. This helps listeners find us among the many aisles of the podcasting seascape. Stick around to the end of the podcast for programming notes for us and our 2 affiliates, Properly Howard Film Reviews, and what Elysia is cooking up next now that Silo is over.
Also, please consider subscribing to our Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can get ad-free episodes and much more. Patreon's a great way to support us, as ad revenues are fickle. Also, this is our 111th birthday, as such.
Huzzah!
Huzzah! And at the end of July, we are going to be sending everyone who is a subscriber a special limited edition, one-time only, custom-made sticker with the Lorehounds logo and a handwritten elven inscription that is only going to be available for birthday Patreon supporters. So
one day, I just want to see a motorcycle drive past me with like flames everywhere, just decked out, and then a Lorehound sticker front and center.
And then you know that your days are done, and you're good.
Send us your selfie videos, folks.
That's right. So you can subscribe at 11:59 and 59 seconds on the last day of July, and you will get one of these stickers. So definitely check us out if that is, especially if something you've been thinking about. One last special announcement. We have a special interview lined up with Professor John Plotz, the Barbara Mendel Professor of Humanities at Brandeis. He has a new book coming out called Ursula LeGuin's Earthsea, My Reading, and it's from Oxford University Press. It should be being officially available at the end of August. We've been in communication with him. He's graciously agreed to join us on the podcast. We'll have more information about that interview. We'll probably do that after we read Tehanu, because we don't want to have to do the whole spoiler avoidance things. But he does an interesting close reading of the books and how they're impactful to him and why her writing is so potent and what it did for him, his own personal journey, in lighting him up and exciting him about literature and the English language and all of these kinds of things. So I think it's going to be a really insightful and enjoyable conversation. So that will probably come after Tehanu, but we'll have more information once we get the logistics of that nailed down. So on to the books. John, can you recap us really quick on this series, our coverage plans, what we've covered, what our plans are?
We've done 1, 2, 3.5, and now we're on the end of 3, and soon we'll be doing book 4, Tehanu, which I think our upcoming interviewee, Professor Plotz, describes it as the beginning of the second trilogy. So that'll be interesting. It starts a trilogy with 2 other things: Tales from Earthsea and The Other Wind. And, we keep going, will we or won't we? We're going to cover it. Can we just say right now we're going to cover it?
I'm
just going to say
Thank you.
I'm just going to say it. So we'll be covering it all.
And there was great rejoicing. Yay!
Are we going to do the Studio Ghibli movie too?
Oh boy.
No.
I don't think. No, I think that's been struck from
I almost
canon.
had you. Everybody got excited for a second.
I think we were confused for a second, actually.
Yeah. All right. So links in the show notes for those previous coverages. Stay tuned for future coverages. And this is our part 2 of the Farthest Shore. This was a dense book. I think a lot of folks, at least some of the comments that we got back, a lot of folks really enjoyed this. It has a real strong story. But let's get into our spoiler-free reactions. John, do you want to kick us off? This is the first time that you've read this, and just as a quick reminder, you've never read these series before. I've read them multiple times, but not for many years. But these are a cornerstone series in my personal life. And Marilyn, you used to even teach LeGuin when you were back at Colby College.
Did Goldilocks design this panel?
Just right.
So
yes.
Yeah.
Part 2.
I liked it. I liked it a lot. I loved it, actually. I'm going to use the L word. I'm ready.
John.
Yay.
Wow.
It was, I thought, a huge improvement over the first part. The first part, there was not enough. It was meaty, but it was not enough of a resolution for me to see where she was going with it yet. And by the end, I really loved it. I loved the dichotomy between Arren and Gerd and how they were sort of foil for each other. I know that's not the real definition of foil, but I'm going to misuse it anyway.
Buddy cop. It was a buddy cop.
It's a buddy cop, but also, Arren has a lot of young Gerd in him, and Gerd is really grown, but also still has some insecurity, also has some of that recklessness in him that he always has had. He's not a different person just because he's older. And this whole idea of youth's folly, but also the bravery of youth sort of living within one person really got me. I don't know. The themes were all there. I liked seeing, it was almost like Gerd versus nega Gerd. It was the dark side of Gerd, what he could have become if he had taken a different path. And just everything was there. It had a very, oh man, I can't spoil this, but it reminded me a lot of the Full Metal Alchemist in the way that it ended. And that is an anime.
Okay.
It's a very good one. It's known as one of the best written animes of all time. It's very tightly plotted, has a really beautiful message in the end, and it ends in a very similar way. And I really liked the message there, and I really liked it here.
Cool.
High praise indeed.
Yeah.
Actually, Wheel of Time basically ends a similar way too. I think LeGuin just is writing everybody's stories for them.
Back in 1970, this was 1972. She started in 68 and these 68, 71, and 72. Yeah. So she's really foundational to fantasy.
Yeah.
Did you say foundation?
Yeah, I did. Was that
different podcast, folks? Different podcast.
Hey, check us out. We're covering Foundation. The first episode just dropped.
A lot of big ideas there too.
Patreon subscribers. So
yeah.
Well, John, I'm impressed. You started out, I think, if I remember right, with A Wizard of Earthsea. You were like, I've seen all this. It's all been done before. And for you to say that you love, capital L, love something, that is great. High praise.
That's really,
and you consume
special.
a lot of fantasy material.
A fantasy soup, let's call it.
Yes.
So that's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
Fantasy soup.
I don't know. No, you know the song. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. It was really terrible in the Hobbit movie, but you got the dirty dishes, you got the soup around. The dwarves are eating. Let's move on.
Marilyn, to you.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Tolkien because I think of the three, this one has the most Tolkien-esque themes.
Oh, I have a whole raft of notes about the comparisons.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with, instead of Buddy Cop, I'm going with Merlin and Arthur. Merlin and young Arthur.
Yeah.
Which I think is also somewhat more Tolkienian in shape. It's interesting, as I started thinking about the book as a whole, I was thinking of, it's got sort of a V-shaped plot.
Hmm.
It starts off in the sunlight at the spring equinox, full of hope and joy, and then it just descends literally into despair.
Mm-hmm.
But then it lands in one of those sacred places of rest and healing, which is so Tolkienian, if you want to use the adjective that way.
Yeah.
And is absolutely my favorite part of the book. I have a hard time with what gets us to that point.
I think we're talking about the same. I have similar notes as well.
Okay.
But we can't say anything until after the break.
Right. And then after this place of rest and recovery, it rises up again from that nadir to the resolution. Although part of that resolution is a classic descent and return. So as I was thinking this out, so I guess it's more W-shaped instead of V-shaped.
No.
But ironically, the second descent feels much more hopeful than the first one does. Mm-hmm. So I find that interesting. For some, it may be hard to read, particularly if you don't hold the author's particular perspective on life and death. They talk about it a lot and in many different contexts. And I think what's there is wise and helpful. And of course, this is, the older, experienced person passing on the wisdom to the younger one, the very younger one. I think Arren is only 17.
Something like that, yeah.
So it's really, I guess people matured more in the fantasy literature days of old, as it were. I love the dragons. I love the dragons and what we learn about them and from them. And this book of the three, we get the most of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Is there's cover? I think a Wizard of Earthsea has dragons on the cover. Like there's a lot of dragon sort of mythology interspersed through the series, but they're not really front and center until this book.
Right.
But I kind of like that. Like she saved it for the big bang at the end. Mm-hmm. At the same time, kind of crazy because she didn't intend it to be a trilogy. So she never going to do the dragons? And then she goes, all right, I made it to 3. I'll give them the dragons.
Well, I think we as readers have to develop our understanding of her dragons because they are quite different. Mm-hmm. In some respects, they're almost an amalgam of the Eastern and Western dragons, but there are also aspects of them that are unique to literature in my mind. There may be others that are similar, but I can't say more about that because we're not dropping spoilers yet. So, and certainly the end is very satisfactory and it seems complete and it's all wrapped up. But then 20 years later, the story continues.
Yeah. And there's a definite hook in this story, uttered by a character. There's a line that when I read it, I was like, hey, here we go.
There's a couple that are not quite as obvious as that.
Right.
Yes.
There's one very obvious one. Yes. I made a note of it too.
I think she's kind of addicted to the world building, right? She
really,
she goes, I'm not going to write anymore. And then she just puts in seeds anyway. And then they grow in her brain. And she goes, all right, fine. I'll go back a little bit. I'll tend the garden.
Which I think is what makes this series so lovely when you understand that, or when you have that piece of information about the context. As a writer, she's just trying to fill out this world, and it's not unlike Tolkien writing on the back of the paper he was grading. Out popped from this hole a hobbit, and he was like, "What's a hobbit?" Well, I better go write some stuff and figure that out. I think she even talks in one of the afterwards or an essay. I can't remember. She talks about the fact that she put in these markers or these hooks just to fill the story out and had no idea that those were then going to become their own books. And that this whole cycle is going to arise out of it.
We talk about gardening method in writing compared to the more outline method in writing fantasy. This is something that's come up in recent years, particularly with the rise of George R. R. Martin and then Brandon Sanderson. People often hold them up next to each other and say, like, these are polar opposites, right? You have George Martin, who just writes what comes to him and tries to sort of tend the garden of his mind. And you have Brandon Sanderson, who sits down there with an outline checklist and says, okay, I'm going to write this scene today. These things are going to happen in it. And how I get there might change, but these are the major points.
Wow.
And I find that while I enjoy an outlined novel, I can enjoy it. I like living in a gardened novel much more. It feels more lived in. It feels like I'm on a journey with the author. And this book, more than the other two, I would say, this book felt like I was in the garden having a great time.
Makes me think of Lawful Good and Chaotic Good.
Yeah. And nothing against Brandon Sanderson. It's a valid method. And it keeps his plots moving, and it keeps everything tight, and it keeps the plot holes out. But it's just a different style. And Tolkien was, a gardener too. He maybe let his garden get a little bit unkempt at times. But, it's the same thing, right? He's just sort of letting things sprout in his brain and then just making sure it grows together and grows nicely together at points.
The famous line is, somebody asked him what it meant, and he said, I don't know. I will have to find out.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
That it's already there, and he is the one exploring and uncovering and discovering and so on and so on.
Right.
I'm in the middle of a class with Signum University where we're reading one by one each of the 12 volumes of the Histories of Middle-earth.
Oh, my.
And you want to talk about chaotic good. I think the first chapters were written 3, 4, 5 times.
Yeah. And he's like, I don't know, put Glorfindel in there. Like he just goes for it.
Anyway, we mustn't talk about Tolkien on this too much on this podcast.
Well, I've got notes.
Right. When it's appropriate, we'll come to it. But what about you, David?
Yeah, this is just such a lovely, lovely, lovely story. It was so very moving, and I think her handling of Arren and Ged's journeys were so deftly managed, and her writing is so confident. She seeds the story expertly, drops the clues and the hints, lets us know what's going on, so that when reveals come and heel turns happen and things emerge, we're not surprised and we feel included in it. And if we predicted something, we feel clever that we had predicted it, and that feels good. The story ended just so confidently, and if she never wrote another word in her life, you could say that this trilogy was a masterclass in writing. This was just an incredible body of work, and I really feel the progression of her writing skill and her abilities by the end of this. When I was highlighting my passages in the book, I felt like I was just going to end up highlighting the entire book. I was just like, okay, now the book is just the entire highlight. So I packed so many notes into my thing. I really had to cut myself off today because it's just dense with religion, psychology, politics, philosophy. You were saying this before, moral lessons and teachings. We also get adventure and drama and exploring the unknown, all of this stuff in just a few hundred pages. And it's just really incredible. And I'm just so glad that we came around to this. I remember when you proposed the idea, I think I was joking, oh, well, I'll jump in for Earthsea, but I don't know about the rest of it. Here we are. It's as fresh and potent to me today as it was when I first read it, when I was a young person. I also think that this is the most filmable of all the movies. I literally think you could start from page 1 of the book and film this almost shot for shot, page for page, with very little changes that I think needed. I think you could just drop in the story. You don't need exposition about who Ged is, and all those things. Just pick it up from where it is, because it's all in the story. And it is such a natural plot for these two characters, these two friends, these two companions to go to the edge of the world and back. I think it would be visually there are so many interesting things that happen in the story. I think of the movie Master and Commander with Russell Crowe and Paul Bettany. I was a big reader of that series of books. Oh gosh, why am I blanking the author's name? Anyway, they did a really good job with that movie adaptation where they picked it up and filmed it. Even though there's a book by that same title, they chopped up a lot of other stuff from it and packed it all in there, but it was so well done. It just felt right in the world. And I really think that if there was ever going to be any kind of visual adaptation of Le Guin's work, I think you just skip everything else and just focus on this one, because I think you get everything we want to know about Gerd, his journey, his experiences. We get the morality lessons, we get the philosophy insights, we get the hero's journey, literally. So it's a perfect book in many ways, dare I say. So
yeah, it makes you wonder why the folks making films from this feel that they have to, I don't know what it is, put their own stamp on it, quote unquote, bring it up to date. The whole thing about adaptation and translation, I understand.
Inspiration versus adaptation is there's another slight area there.
Right. I understand that you're supposed to, make your mark and do something original. But if that's so important, then why are you taking somebody else's story?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with achieving recognition for a really good and faithful translation of an amazing story from one medium to another?
To get to the Tolkien of it all, would you say that the Jackson adaptation of at least Lord of the Rings, the first movie, is pretty close? Because that they did have to do some chopping and changing, but it certainly delivered on the promise of Tolkien.
They delivered an amazingly exciting and wonderfully, beautifully realized film.
Mm-hmm.
There were some key Tolkien themes that were ignored.
Okay.
And that breaks my heart.
What, Tom Bombadil?
One of them, men are weak. Everybody was mad about that one.
Yeah.
Everybody was mad about that
Elrond's
line.
character and I don't know. I'm not in a Tolkien headspace right now, so I can't
all right.
I
trot out all my usual things. But
I gotta say, when I first read The Hobbit after watching The Lord of the Rings, I saw the movies first, and I read Elrond, I was like, who the heck is this guy? Because he's just so jolly and welcoming and friendly, and he almost seemed like, hey, hello, I'm Elrond, and then we have men are weak in the movie.
Yeah, tell me that's kind of summer. I mean, it just doesn't, doesn't fit. And the changing of Aragorn's character.
All right, so we shouldn't veer too far off this path.
No, we shouldn't.
Right.
You don't want to push that button in me, because it will take us far and away.
But I think, I still stand on the fact that I think a filmmaker could have a point of view on this story and just film this as it is, because there are so many ups and downs, fasts and slows. The resolution of everything is so visual. Her writing is so evocative. I can feel and smell certain scenes from the book, especially at the end, towards the end. It's really a master work of literature, and in just a few hundred pages.
I know.
Like 250 something odd pages. I don't know. Yeah.
I think they would probably want to trim some of the key conversations that lie at the heart of, the questions of, what is life and death, and why shouldn't we want to live forever, and those sorts of things. But I hope they would do it carefully and judiciously.
Right. Yeah. I think you can translate it. Yeah, 272 pages according to the Googles. So, all right. Well, anything else that anyone has to say before we take a good quick break, and then we can get into the synopsis and major themes? And we're back. John, do you want to take us through the synopsis of the last 8 chapters?
Yeah, so I've broken this up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts, not too many. And we are going to talk about each one. We'll weave into the conversation our themes and some quotes. Here's the first part. After stopping in Lorbarnery on their quest to find where the luck runs out, Gerd and Arren learn more clues about the dark wizard who supposedly will cheat death. Gerd heals a woman named Arren by taking her true name and giving her a new one, leading Arren to love him more. Her son, a madman named Sopley, offers to guide Gerd and Arren to the one who has conquered death. The trio heads to Obehall on the Lookfar, where they are attacked, leading to Sopley's drowning and Gerd's incapacitation. Boy, there's a lot of proper nouns there that were really getting me for a minute, but we got through it.
You did.
Can I just say before I forget that I think 1 or 2 episodes ago on this podcast, I said there's a Jewish tradition of giving someone a different Hebrew name to save them from death, to help them escape the eye of death.
Right.
And as soon as I read this passage, I went, there it is. There's the influence. I was like the Leo DiCaprio meme of him pointing at the screen.
Right. Yes. Yes. Yay.
Yeah.
Can I just want to do a quote check really quick. Do we all three have this quote in our notes? Marilyn, do you have this one?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I have it too. So
the kissing
clearly,
scene?
this is one of the few ones where you've actually put a quote in the notes, John. So
I have.
You want to read it?
Sure. I'm finally here with a quote. Sparrowhawk took that wrinkled, tear-blubbered face between his hands and very lightly, very tenderly, kissed her on the eyes. She stood motionless, her eyes closed. Then, with his lips close to her ear, he spoke a little in the old speech, once more kissed her and let her go. She opened clear eyes and looked at him a while, with a brooding, wondering gaze. So a newborn child looks at its mother, so a mother looks at her child. She turned slowly and went to the door, entered it, and closed it behind her, all in silence, with the still look of wonder on her face. In silence, the mage turned and started back toward the road. Arren followed him. He dared ask no question. Presently, the mage stopped, there in the ruined orchard, and said, I took her name from her and gave her a new one, and thus, in some sense, a rebirth. There was no other help or hope for her. I was almost tearing up there.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful scene.
Dusty in here.
Can I carry on a little bit?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's two things going on here. There's the name thing, and then there's attitudes around women in magic, I believe.
Yes, the whole scene starts, well, this particular portion starts. All at once she trembled and said in a whisper, I know thee. I, like knows like, sister. And then after where John just stopped, Ged's voice was strained and stifled. She was a woman of power, he went on. No mere witch or potion maker, but a woman of art and skill, using her craft for the making of the beautiful. A proud woman and honorable. That was her life. And it is all wasted. He turned abruptly away, walked off into the orchard aisles, and there stood beside a tree trunk, his back turned. I think this is the first time in Earthsea that we hear that you can be a woman of power for good.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's turning the corner on this.
That she was actually considered something of a wizard, if not exactly a wizard.
Yeah. Or weaving the art, her magic and her craft were of such a power and beauty that he's moved by her.
Yeah. And I also thought of this in terms of when John was asking very early on if it was possible for a true name to change over time. In this instance, it is not the name that has changed over time, but that the name was taken away so that a new one could be given.
Which goes into John's point about renaming somebody.
He kind of saved her from the eye of the Dark Wizard, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it seems like to me. It's very similar. I wonder if she was familiar with this tradition, or if this is a tradition that goes beyond Judaism and into other, maybe Eastern religions.
It's funny because I had in my notes his compassion in this moment gave me the way I reacted to it was very like a Christ-like thing where he's taking her, he's washing the feet of somebody else and showing compassion and healing to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that struck in a very Christ-like thing to do.
Well, this scene really, I think, does the full comparison with Cobb, which is where Cobb is taking advantage of people's vulnerability and is using them for his own ends. Ged specifically says at one point, I may have been able to get the location of the man out of her. Something like that. I may have been able to get information out of her. But basically, at what cost? Like she was already gone. I couldn't bear to make her suffer anymore.
Compassion.
And and that's just the opposite. It's the opposite of what Cobb is doing.
Once he's renamed her, she doesn't remember any of the past. So she could not tell him.
Right. Yeah. So he gives her the gift of a new identity, which closes off his options, but is the right thing to do for her.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And the respect of one magic user to another. I'm sure there are other traditions that I've read about in which they change the name so that, I guess in the Jewish tradition, the angel of death will pass over and not recognize them. Yeah. I'm sure I've encountered a similar concept in other places, but I think it's best known from the Jewish tradition.
Every time there's some sort of conflict or crisis or issue to be solved, I always think about Arren and what he's learning by observing Ged here. That he's exploring this world to its furthest ends, seeing, these people in far-flung places or with special skills and important tradecraft in the life of the Earthsea archipelagos, but then also to learn these lessons of compassion, of the power of magic, that magic isn't just some wizards on a island, but it's magic is all the way through the society that you're ultimately going to be ruler of. And for him to see this and understand it all, I think is so very important into his education to becoming a once and future king, if I can bring the Arthurian into it.
I mean, if you'd like to hear Aaron's words about it, which are similar to your feelings, but his heart went out utterly to his companion, not now with that first romantic ardor and adoration, but painfully as if a link were drawn forth from the very inmost of it and forged into an unbreaking bond. For in this love he now felt there was compassion, without which love is untempered and is not whole and does not last.
Yeah. And compassion is the heart of Buddhist teaching. And Buddhism and Taoism are, not the same, but they are very closely connected.
And when there's a lack of compassion in the world, then what does that? So as the world is draining out, and all of these things, as a ruler, as a leader, to have compassion is such a critical element of your being as a leader. Because otherwise you end up with other situations and are driven by a different set of values and beliefs.
And there's also the expression that says, have compassion with all things, including yourself.
Yeah, right.
Which is also crucial for a ruler to have.
Yeah.
I think maybe that is the biggest maturation of Ged, is having that understanding of himself. And it's very realistic to life, whereas when Ged grows up through this series, he does not lose who he is, but instead understands who he is and compensates for it.
Yeah.
That's how we grow up, right? Where our flaws, while they may be managed, will be with us for our lives. We can only figure out how to manage them and how to work with ourselves and show love to ourselves.
How to have compassion on it. Yeah, I also, for the first time, found myself thinking about this when they keep describing these communities that are so despairing and depressed and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And this one man says, "There's no more proper singing," he said angrily. "It's the young people's fault, always chopping and changing the way things are done and not learning the old songs." This really reminds me of the feeling of the times in the early 1970s. It was after the revolutions of the 60s and the assassinations and all that general upheaval. And I remember seeing an article once that talked about the generation that was going to change the world, the ones who were talking about free love and peace and all that. That was the 60s. And then this article said that the younger siblings of those older revolutionaries were only concerned with getting good jobs and good salaries and had lost their altruism. And I don't think that was a fair assessment, but it was certainly emblematic of the times. My high school graduating class of 74 was the first one that lived through the days of the first president to resign before he got impeached. And I was that younger sibling of my sister who was of the 60s generation and climbed out of a window of a college building on the campus of Wisconsin to avoid the tear gas that was being
Oh, wow.
shot to disperse the crowds around the Dow Chemical stuff and all that sort of thing. So it just, that whole, it's not like it was in the old days. I mean, I'm sure that's true since the beginning of time. But in this particular instance, given that we're writing at that hinge point between the 60s and the 70s, that it really brought that to mind for me.
I think it's going to be interesting to talk to Professor Plotz too when we get to that interview, because I think he sets some context for the books, and that I think he highlights or draws a line around the fact that she was writing these books during that time, and I think it would be very hard unless one cloistered oneself off entirely, to not be having those influences around you and to inform your action, the way that you wrote and the things that you wrote about and how the worlds that you were writing about function, that it can't in some modicum be in there. And
Yeah.
I think that gets covered in Plotz's book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, something I wanted to talk about was Sopley. Sopley? How are we pronouncing this?
I always did it Sopley in my mind.
That feels right.
I thought Sopley, but I don't care.
Boy. We have a debate. Sapley.
No.
I don't know. I'm just making things up. But this is an interesting character because he's described as a madman, which, I don't think I would use that word today, but that's how they describe him in the book. It's even the name of the chapter. And he originally is very much offended by Ged because Ged takes his mother's memories away, basically. But I think he realizes very quickly that's the right thing for her. And he goes off to help Ged. This fear of the water now, this was something that puzzled me. He's afraid of water. He dies drowning because he jumps into the water. I know he was trying to get to land, but does anyone have a read on this and what she was going for with this?
Well, I think it's highly ironic that you live in a place called Earthsea, and you're afraid of water.
Yeah, you don't really have a lot of options there. You should work that out.
Yeah.
We lived on a big island, so I didn't think about it prior, and now that you bring it up, though, I think to me, the way that I'm relating to it now is that oftentimes when there are things that we're resisting so fervently and we're so afraid of, and we're keeping our fear at bay, that's ultimately our undoing, or that's ultimately the thing that is the cause of our downfall. And that in this case, he was driven by his fear to act irrationally. And to act against his better instincts, or better ideas, better intellectual ideas. Oh, well, maybe if I think about this is not such a good idea. He was just operating on pure animal instinct, on the less intellectual aspects of his mind, and so that he died by drowning is in some ways poetically fitting. And I guess that's the way that I boxed that particular part of it up.
I buy it.
I see the sea as being a rich representative of life, because to live is to change. And the sea is constantly changing and moving and so forth. So if you are so fixated on not dying that you are willing to give up life so that you don't die, which is the basic so-called quote unquote logic that folks are operating under who have listened to the temptation that comes in their dreams and so on, then the sea represents this richness of life. It's from the sea that life emerges, although they wouldn't necessarily know that in a scientific way, but
No, yeah.
in an instinctual, in a story-based way. The islands rose out of the sea at the
Right.
beginning of creation.
Right.
So
Okay.
that does not represent, this thing that they've convolutedly said, okay, in order to never die, we give up life.
Interestingly, too, later on, though, the sea is healing. It's healing for Arren.
Absolutely.
It's healing for him in a couple of different places, too, because after Ged frees him from the slavers, there's a scene of him bathing and
Yes.
being restored by the sea. And then later on the rafts, he's swimming and diving and living that life. And that is also healing and restorative for him.
The first
Why don't
thing
we get there?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay.
Marooned out on the sea, Ged and Arren are rescued by the Children of the Open Sea, also known as the Raft People, but don't tell David. That's an inside joke. He called the wordsmith police on me earlier today. Ged narrowly survives his injuries, even though there was death in him. Ged speaks Arren's true name, Lebanon, and reveals that he's been using Arren's fear of death as a guide. The evil wizard's influence reaches the Children of the Sea and causes them to forget their songs. Arren takes over and sings the creation of Ea.
Yeah, this whole, I think we were both pointing to this earlier at the beginning of the episode, Marilyn, that this whole sequence is just lovely and wonderful. And
Yeah.
It still goes for me to the education of Arren,
Yes.
to being a ruler, to really know the furthest extent of what will become the realm that he's entrusted with. To know all of these different aspects. And it's just such an interesting thing. We go from the tombs of Atuan, dry and dusty and cold, to, all the way to the oceans. It's a lovely bit of world building.
And reading it this time, I really got the sense that sovereignty is a major theme in this book in particular. It's on the raft with the sea people. Arren's sovereignty is over others. He's recognized as a lord immediately by a fellow lord, which I love.
But he susses him out, right? He goes, all right, but are you a lord or are you more of a kid? Because I'm going to be very different to you either way.
Well, here's the text right here. This man was short and thin like the others, boy-like in frame, but his face was strong-featured and weathered by the years. He wore nothing but a loincloth, but dignity clothed him amply. He must sleep, he said, and Arren left Sparrowhawk and came to him. You are the chief of this folk, Arren said, knowing a prince when he saw one. I am, the man said with a short nod. Arren stood before him, erect and unmoving. Presently the man's dark eyes met his briefly. You are a chief also, he observed. I am, Arren answered. He would have liked very much to know how the raftman knew it, but remained impassive. But I serve my lord there. I just love that whole characterization.
Yeah, it's really great.
A chief recognizes a chief, someone whose sovereignty is to rule people. There is something there that like recognizes like. Although Arren really wants to know, okay, tell me, give me the point by point. What is it about me that you recognize as being?
It's that Game of Thrones dialogue, my lord versus my lord. That's funny. Yeah, no, there's all these tells, right? How's your posture? How's your maybe your clothes are rags, but you rolled the cuffs up to make them look nice. It's a bunch of little tells he probably has.
Interesting in contrast too with Ged recognizing the dyer on Lorenberry. She, like knows like.
Yes.
You know me, I know you, because of the
Yes.
way that we see things and refer to things, the language that we use. And again, it's all part of Arren's ascension, all the way ultimately to treating with dragons, right? And the dragons knowing who he is, they can see him, right?
Yes. Well, in seeing him interacting with this people who are so different from him, that's when we understand that Arren is truly a prince. He's raised to be both dignified and humble, and he's able to interact with all sorts of people in the strangest possible circumstances and maintain his equanimity throughout. I think that's, for me, was a really solid piece of it.
Yeah.
These people were so different from him, and yet he found the commonalities. And through it all, they recognize, this is a sovereign, this is a lord. But Ged's sovereignty is over himself.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's not over other people. And it's really fascinating to watch the comparison between these two and the difference that it makes in how they interact with things that happen to him.
Yeah.
Now, this is the one part of all three books where I do have a couple of criticisms for LeGuin. The first one is that there was a great description of how the Children of the Sea follow the seasons, and they move around in this particular pattern, following the great old ones and all of this. The one place that I got hung up a little bit is that, now I know this is not necessarily a spherical world, and I'm not sure necessarily how the seasons change here and what are the drivers, the ecological and physical geographical drivers. But one thing that I did hook on was that people who don't live in one of the northern or in the northern or the southern hemisphere, their experience of seasons is very different than ours. And I felt that this was a very northern hemispheric perception of, okay, here's a summertime and we all get together and we party, and then it's wintertime and we go and we survive, and then we have these sort of in between times. And for a good chunk of our Earth's population who live in equatorial regions, that's not the case. We have the very different seasons. The drivers are different because you're not tilting away from the sun, right?
But isn't this not necessarily a round planet?
That's what I preferenced.
There's an end. Yeah. So there's an end to this world. I'm a little skeptical of your argument here, David.
Well, that's why, and I preferenced it. Yeah. I did preference it, but I also wanted just to point out that in this one place, she is very locked into a North America, a northern hemispheric model of seasons. And my mom actually taught at a course once while they were doing some work in East Africa, and when she was talking about the metaphor of seasons, a man's the life of a person, their spring, their summer, their fall, their winter. And the students were like, nah, we don't have that. So we get it. We understand the literature here, but that doesn't apply to us. So we don't have the same as lived experience as you do, because we don't have a fall and a winter. We have short rains and long rains. We have, different things. So it was, like I said, it's a small thing, but it is one thing where I did detect that she's very locked into a particular literature, a tradition of literature.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit too, for two reasons. One, can you have solstices and equinoxes on a flat world?
Good question.
I don't think you can.
Sure.
And we clearly have solstices and equinoxes because we have the long dance, we have the long night,
right,
and we had the balance days. So that speaks to me of a round world. Now, maybe that's because I've never experienced those things on a flat world. Maybe it is possible. The other
how does the firmament work? Let's get somebody right in.
Well, and the other thing, David, is the people of the sea travel across the equator from the southernmost reaches to the northernmost reaches. So they're not an equatorial people.
No, and
They're
I'm not
very
saying
far
that I'm not saying that she's saying that they are. I'm just saying that this
Okay.
is the one place where I detected her. There's a lot of places you could detect her background. And for me, this is just one of them that popped out, saying that she's coming from a particular literary tradition. And I just wanted to flag that that literary tradition doesn't apply to our primary world in totality. There are people who don't experience the seasons in the same way.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the Lord of the Rings uses calendar dates that from our world. So let's I'm gonna say let's let this one go.
So my other one is they must have different whale sharks there, because she talks about the man led Arren across it while one of these others reached out with a heavy gaff tip with a curving whale shark's tooth and hauled the nearby rafts closer till they could step the gap. Whale sharks don't have big teeth like that in our world. So anyway,
well, there you go.
Now I'm done with my criticisms. We can move on.
Well, I really love the fact that they think that Ged is one of the great ones, by which they mean the whales.
Yeah.
That they follow, which are life and death and, majorly important to their culture. I love that little flavoring. I mean, this whole section is LeGuin the anthropologist, let's face it.
Absolutely.
I mean, she's really bringing forth her knowledge and understanding of what makes a culture and offering us one example of a possible culture. And it's rest, it's community. He plays with the children, Arren does. He swims, and the first time he sees Ged after he's been so injured that he couldn't even talk to him, the first thing Ged says is, golly, you look like you did when I first met you now. You're healed, you're brown and sleek, and clearly have been having some healing, restorative pleasure with these people.
Here's one of my first of the Lord of the Rings comparisons. They stood in the boat, three of them, stalk thin and angular, great-eyed like strange dark herons or cranes. And I don't know why, but I was like, oh, the elves of Earthsea. This is, this raft place, as you said, this is Rivendell in a way, a place of respite and refuge, and still yet untouched by, what's happening in the world. Ultimately, it comes.
Or they think they're untouched.
Yeah,
they think
it does
untouched.
Come. Yeah.
David, I can make this comparison to you since you actually watched season 1 of Wheel of Time. We'll get Marilyn there eventually. The traveling people, the Tuatha'an, the Tinkers, I call them sometimes. The people who Perrin and Egwene got to in season 1.
Yep. Yep.
Same vibe. They're these people who just are always on the move. They don't have a lot, but what they have, they're willing to share. And they have their own way of life. You can take it or leave it. You can join them if you want. You can leave if you want. Very much the same vibe. It just was screaming Tuathan to me as I was reading this.
Right. Well, I think that's, you just summarized the classic definition of a nomadic lifestyle.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, it depends, right?
Terrain you're crossing.
Depends, though. Is it a closed society or an open society? I think these are two very distinctly open societies, right? They will take you in if you come.
Although some people were saying we shouldn't take him in. They're land folk, but the chief said no, we're going to take them in.
Well, John, I think the measure of it is how big are their feet and how big are their hearts.
With our hearts even bigger than our feet.
You know where that all came from?
No.
It came from one particular Tolkienian artist, one of the very early ones, whose drawings showed the hobbits with very large feet. Tolkien never said that the hobbits had large feet.
Wow.
But that one artist was so much in the popular gaze for so long that everybody picked up on that detail and thought, well, it's true, because look.
Wow. Well, thank you so much to that artist, because now we can say hobbit feet. I think we're ready to talk about the next section. Before they can leave the Children of the Sea, Ged and Arren are visited by the dragon Orm Embar, who directs the duo to Celadar, where the Dark Wizard can be found. After struggling to pass through the Dragon's Run with its dragons afflicted by the wizard's influence, Gerd and Arren find Orm Embar in Celadar. However, he has lost the ability of speech.
This is where I get more Lord of the Rings vibes, where the first two, we two must stand upon the balance point, the very fulcrum of the world. And if I fall, you fall, and all the rest. Mm-hmm. And so this, jokingly cop buddy thing suddenly becomes Sam and Frodo having to go on this journey to deal with and manage for the thing, which is an undoing, which could bring ruin to the rest. So it felt very, again, just getting those vibes of Tolkien soup.
So we've gone from potatoes to Shelob's Lair, is what you're telling me.
Yes.
But I think we also skipped a piece that I want to back up to, if you don't mind. And that is their experience on The Longest Night.
Good point.
The shortest night of the year.
The long dance.
The long dance. Thank you. That's where the word long comes in. I like when Arren says, "This is most wonderful, my lord. Never did I hear of such a people as yours. My home is very far away from here. Yet there too, on the island of Enland, we dance the long dance on Midsummer Eve." And the chief responds, "You stamp the earth down and make it safe." The chief said dryly, "We dance on the deep sea."
Yeah.
You learn a lot about a people on a festival day. I've always said it.
Absolutely. All the cultural constructs come out. Yeah. And the beauty of the description of it. Can I read it?
You can.
Do we have time?
You read whatever you want.
All night long, the shortest night of the year, torches burned in the rafts, which lay gathered in a great circle under the thick starred sky, so that a ring of fires flickered on the sea. The raft folk danced, using no drum or flute or any music but the rhythm of bare feet on the great rocking rafts, and the thin voices of their chanters ringing plaintive in the vastness of their dwelling place, the sea. There was no moon that night, and the bodies of the dancers were dim in the starlight and torchlight. Now and then, one flashed like a fish leaping, a youth vaulting from one raft to the next, long leaps and high, and they vied with one another, trying to circle all the ring of rafts and dance on each, and so come round before the break of day. Arren danced with them, for the long dance is held on every isle of the archipelago, though the steps and songs may vary. But as the night drew on and many dancers dropped out and settled down to watch or doze, and the voices of the chanters grew husky, he came with a group of high-leaping lads to the chief's raft, and there stopped, while they went on. And they have some conversation, and then suddenly, he roused all at once. The chanter had fallen silent. Not only the one near whom they sat, but all the others on the rafts, near and far. The thin voices had died away like a far-off piping of seabirds, and it was still. Arren looked over his shoulder to the east, expecting dawn. But only the old moon rose low, just rising, golden among the summer stars. "Why do you cease?" the chief was asking the singer. "It is not daybreak, not even dawn." The man stammered and said, I do not know." "Sing on. The long dance has not ended." "I do not know the words," the chanter said, and his voice rose high as if in terror. "I cannot sing. I have forgotten the song." "Sing another then." "There are no more songs. It is ended," the chanter cried, and bent forward till he crouched on the decking, and the chief stared at him in amazement. The mage stood up. As he did so, a faint light, white and quick, ran along his staff, burning clearest in the rune that was set in silver in the wood. "The dance is not ended," he said, "nor the night. Arren, sing." Arren would have said, "I cannot, Lord." But instead he looked at the 9 stars in the south, drew a deep breath, and sang. His voice was soft and husky at first, but it grew stronger as he sang, and the song was the oldest song of the creation of Ea, and the balance of the dark and the light, and the making of green lands by him who spoke the first word, the eldest lord, Sigoi. Before the song was ended, the sky had paled to grayish blue, and in it only the moon and Gorbadon still burned faintly. The torches hissed in the wind of dawn. Then, the song done, Arren was silent, and the dancers who had gathered to listen returned quietly from raft to raft as the light brightened in the east. "That is a good song," the chief said. His voice was uncertain, though he strove to speak impassively. "It would not be well to end the long dance before it is completed. I will have the lazy chanters beaten with nilgu thongs." "Comfort them, rather," Sparrowhawk said. He was still afoot, and his tone was stern. "No singer chooses silence. Come with me, Arren."
So I love this thread of the long dance on the short night all the way through the world, all the way
Yes.
even to the tombs of Atuan. Even Tenar, they dance this dance.
Yes.
And so, yeah, no matter how far flung or where, it's a really great piece of world building and connective tissue.
It also takes me back to the fact that some people were saying, "Hey, they're land folk, let's just ignore them."
Mm-hmm.
And the chief said, "No, let's take him on and feed him."
Right.
And if he hadn't.
Right. And that's a good point that Arren actually completes the ceremony for them. And, again, yet another great piece of education for Arren and experience for him in his, becoming a ruler, that he sat with all these different people and had all of these experiences with them and shared that understanding and knowledge with them, so that he has empathy and compassion for those that he's ultimately going to be responsible for in some way. So,
yeah, it's an interesting notion to be king of the whole world.
Yeah. Yes,
and at the same time, trying to find this balance point of valuing the uniqueness of each culture and at the same time recognizing the commonality that holds us together. And again, that's kind of trying to find a balance point, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And how can you rule migratory people like that? It drives our Earth, our primary world's governments crazy when we have migratory populations. It just goes against all of the systems of governments that we have developed and designed and imposed in the world.
Yes, and can you allow for that difference and still recognize the commonality?
Right.
But as soon as you feel a need to count and number and control and all those things and decide that one form of education is the only form of education that is quote unquote good.
Or how we're going to pay for stuff, land taxes and, real estate taxes, things like that.
How are we going to keep track of you?
Yes.
Which I'm not saying is a bad thing. Okay. But if you've chosen a lifestyle that says you quote unquote own land, then you have cut off a whole different kind of lifestyle. I see this in the contrast between Wabanaki culture here on this land that we now call Maine and the government of Maine trying to impose its concept onto the Wabanaki people.
Right.
Land was not owned. Different groups were known to use different sections for their particular food sources, but they migrated. They followed a pattern as they followed the food sources, just exactly the way, well, not exactly the way, but the same concept is what
it's
the
resource
the open sea are
availability
doing.
And
and you don't own, you are part of, and you tend to, and you draw from and are grateful to the land.
And do you have to,
or the sea?
You have to levy for your ruler so that you've got foot soldiers to, be counted among an army when you're fighting with another ruler. And, and are you, what was the movie recently around the French, God, what was it? It was the Last Duel with Adam Driver and what's his name? How do you like them apples?
Matt Damon?
Matt Damon.
Oh, we love Matt Damon.
That what was interesting about that movie was part of what's going on is those particular knights were involved in going around to making sure that all the little towns and fiefdoms and things like that were all producing up and paying up to the king, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that sort of driver, then why do you need to keep track of people? Why do you need to levy taxes or, for foot soldiers,
Yeah, in England, the main change was when the Normans invaded, suddenly all the land belonged to the king.
Right.
And was let out to people in exchange for services.
Right.
That was not the Anglo-Saxon pattern prior to that time.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, land was considered to be hereditary to certain peoples.
Right.
So it's still land ownership in a sense, but not nearly as tightly wound. Wow, is this a digression or what?
So dragons. Dragons. I think we were on that. I'm going to bring us back. We talked about the song. I did really love, by the way, and your performance was great, Marilyn, but the song that Arren sings, it felt like he was almost getting in tune with the world rather than choosing a song to sing. It's what came out. It's what his soul uttered rather than something that he is, selecting out of a songbook that he's just saying because it's, free association.
And I'm willing to bet it was the first song he was ever taught.
Probably.
As a child.
Right. One of the things that, and not even as a noble child, just as a child. That's what you learn in this world.
Put a pin in this for the next book, okay?
Okay.
All right. So I read the synopsis of the dragons already. Go back 20 minutes if you want to hear that. What are our thoughts on the Dragon's Run?
Well, I have a question for you. Did you realize that dragons have no gender?
Oh, no, I didn't.
No, I didn't.
Or at least nothing that we might identify as gender.
Yeah.
I mean, somehow younglings do get produced. And sometimes they are referred to, well, I think all the ones we've seen so far are referred to as he. But in fact, it's sort of, it's not spoken, but I think later it is made clear subsequently.
Yeah.
That even in that particular, they are different from us.
To pick up something, John, that you said, I think earlier, that she saved almost the best for last. And I really appreciated that, with the dragon stuff, that she didn't cheapen the impact of dragons here. She brought them in when it made sense for the story, and there's real stakes involved in the story. The dragons have every interest in making sure, because they're being affected by what's been done.
Yeah, because you get the sense of the first dragon in the series that Gerd sort of, makes a deal with.
Right.
The dragon's like, I'm going to do what I want. I don't really care about your concerns, the concerns of the world of humans. And now you have this dragon coming to Gerd saying, guy, we need your help. You got to get over here. This is an issue.
Hunting me. What dragons hunt, they find. He came to ask my help. He laughed shortly. And that's the thing. I would not believe if any told me that a dragon turned to a man for help, and of them all, that one. That's just I
see this as a sign of Ged's sovereignty.
Interesting. How so? Say more.
Well, because the dragons go to him. They don't go to Roke. They don't go to the mages. They come to the Dragon Lord, with whom they have some experience.
And we remember that a Dragon Lord is only a person that the dragons will speak to and not eat.
Yeah, I love that too. And Gerd does comment, I think, in that section that you were reading, but he's just gobsmacked. Who would have believed that a dragon would come to a man, to a human for aid?
Yeah.
How could this be possible?
Right.
And it's because they are, in their way, every bit as threatened as humans are by this evil thing. And their kind of power and magic is not sufficient to deal with the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's a human-caused problem, if you will.
Right.
And the dragons have found that because of what this human has done, they can't take care of it.
Hmm.
But eventually, they are essential to helping to take care of it.
Right.
And it's human and dragon working together to solve this problem, which again is the balance, the two coming together. And again, put a pin in this one too, folks.
Should we bring that in? Should we bring in the fight so we can talk about this all together?
Sure.
All right.
Because I've got a couple more dragon things too. Before the fight, I want to just throw this one out.
Please.
Arren did not speak, but he thought, "I do not care what comes after. I have seen dragons on the wind of morning."
I had that one pinned too.
Yeah, so good.
And that first line where they're approaching the island. Sorry, I got to get back to my dragon place here. They're sailing up there. I see gulls, said Arren after rubbing his eyes and searching all the blue-gray horizon before the boat. The mage laughed. Could even a hawk see gulls at 20 miles distance? As the sun brightened above the eastern mist, the tiny wheeling flecks in the air that Arren watched seemed to sparkle like gold dust shaken in water or dust motes in a sunbeam. And then Arren realized that they were dragons.
So good. She really makes them special. She really does.
Yes.
And I love her for that. That it's not cheap. She doesn't throw them away. She doesn't use them in a way that's just to hype things up. But they really, really are a special element to her world building.
Tolkien's dragons are terrible, but they're not beautiful. You know, I would say.
Yeah. No, they're. You mean you could say they're beautiful like a tank is beautiful. I suppose. And in fact, no, I'm the reason why I drew on that is because in the earlier versions, from the histories of Middle Earth, the way dragons are described is segmented and crawling over the earth and curling, and so it's almost exactly a description of the very early tanks that were used in the First World War.
Wow,
interesting. Yeah,
makes
and
sense.
John Garth in particular is convinced that that was some of the inspiration for Tolkien.
Sure. But I mean, I'm just saying that I think that LeGuin really nails the balance of awe and wonder with terror. These dragons are dangerous, but they're not solely terrible.
The old dragon, Callison, looked at him from one long, awful golden eye. There were ages beyond ages in the depths of that eye. The morning of the world was deep in it. Yeah. Really, my instant reaction was, it made me think of a black hole, of just this infinite depth of...
You've been watching Foundation.
Yeah, I'm watching too much Foundation. But just that you could see all the way back through time in this dragon's eye, this swirling, golden, amazing thing. And I love that description of Callisen in the fog, just sitting there like this giant cat thing. And I love Arren for going, oh, there's a dragon. That's cool.
Well, I think that I know Arren's kingship is first proclaimed by a dragon on Celidor. The mage turned his head. Lebanon, he said, and the boy got up and came forward, though he wanted to go not one step closer to those 15-foot jaws and the long, slit-pupiled yellow-green eyes that burned upon him from the air. Sparrowhawk said nothing to him but put a hand on his shoulder and spoke again to the dragon briefly. Lebanon, said the vast voice with no passion in it. Agni Lebanon. He looked up. The pressure of the mage's hand reminded him, and he avoided the gaze of the green gold eyes. He could not speak the old speech, but he was not dumb. I greet thee, Orm Embar, Lord Dragon, he said as clearly as one prince greets another. Then there was a silence, and Arren's heart beat hard and labored. But Sparrowhawk, standing by him, smiled. Well done, lad, he said hoarsely. It is not easy talking to dragons. And that word Agni is the old speech for king.
Right. Oh, right.
So it is the first time that Arren is called King Lebanon.
Wow.
Because Orm Embar recognizes instantly this is the one.
Fascinating to me, too, that his king name is not his adopted name. It is his true name.
Yeah.
It's, we've known this whole series that giving your true name makes you vulnerable. And yet a king who is vulnerable for all kinds of reasons is willing to give his true name to the world.
Well, even as his sovereignty is because he rules over, his sovereignty is because he serves.
That's a good way to look at it.
If everything is in the balance as it needs to be.
All right. Well, we are going to the end of the world, but first we're taking a break. And we're back. At the end of the world, they find Cobb, the dark wizard that Ged defeated many years ago and previously mentioned to Arren. Cobb spent many years trying to master the magic to cheat death and has opened a rift between the worlds of living and dead, taking life from the world of the living. Cobb nearly wins the battle with Ged, but Orm Embar sacrifices himself to destroy the physical form of Cobb. Ged and Arren follow what remains of Cobb into the dry land of the dead, where Ged defeats Cobb and seals the rift between living and dead. To do so, Ged sacrifices his wizardry.
Yeah, this is the point at which Arren recognizes what his sword is for.
Mm-hmm.
Arren is now ready to take up his sword.
Right,
In
to actually
earlier
use it.
sections, we see him thinking, well, should I put it on? Should I leave it off? Now I'm not going to put it on. It's old. I'm young. It's killed people. But on this island, Orm Embar appears while Ged is asleep. And Arren takes up his sword. Standing between it and Ged, Arren answered, Orm Embar, and he held his bare sword in his hand. It did not feel heavy now. The smooth, worn hilt was comfortable in his hand. It fitted. The blade had come lightly, eagerly from the sheath. The power of it, the age of it, were on his side, for he knew now what use to make of it. It was his sword.
Right. So all of these things I love the trajectory that she sets for Arren, that the closer and closer there's this coming together of all the elements. And for a story, a piece of literature, we want, beginning, middles, and ends. We want rising action. We want denouement. We want antagonists, protagonists. And she just so effortlessly brings all of the elements together, weaves all of these different elements for Arren to when it happens, it happens. Mm-hmm. And it's so natural and it feels so right. And that is just such superb storytelling.
And then later on, when Cobb refuses to show Ged and Arren where the hole is that he's opened, hatred triumphed. I will not, he said. At that, Arren stepped forward and he said, you will. The blind man held still. The cold silence and the darkness of the realm of the dead surrounded them, surrounded their words. Who are you? My name is Lebanon. Ged spoke. You who call yourself king, do you not know who this is?
I had that quote too.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good.
I should stop quote snitching.
Well, and I guess we should talk about the whole life death thing here. This is this is really the source of this part of their journey and the story. There was this one quote here really quick. And the door I opened is open not only here, but in the minds of the living, in the depths of the unknown places of their being, where we are all one in the darkness. And I just thought, oh, this is so Jungian. This is so collective unconsciousness. This is so, and this goes into her whole world building of we all dance the same dance and sing the same songs on the same night, no matter how far we are apart in this, in this particular realm. But the idea that Cobb is speaking to us all through the And then there's another quote that Ged says, I think, "Where are the servants of this anti-king? In our minds, lad, in our minds, the traitor, the self that cries, 'I want to live. Let the world burn so long as I can live.' The little traitor soul in us, in the dark, like a worm in the apple. He talks to all of us, but only some understand him. The wizards and the sorcerers, the singers, the makers, and the heroes, and the ones who seek to be themselves." So this idea that this darkness that exists inside of us, that Cobb has taken advantage of that and can speak to everyone in the world through this self that, unless realized and embraced like Ged did, we're all at not at its mercy, but there's a disadvantage unless we can identify this anti-hero, this anti-king that's in our mind. And that is so very Eastern, right? That is so very Eastern philosophy. And this is where she's just packing in all this stuff into this very short story.
Related to this, earlier on, the conversation between Arren and Ged, the first conversation they have after they've been rescued, that Arren had thought that wizardry had never even been real. He had gotten to this place, and that Ged had tricked him.
Right.
"I was afraid of you. I was afraid of death. I was so afraid of it, I would not look at you because you might be dying. I could think of nothing except that there was a way of not dying for me, if I could find it. But all the time life was running out, as if it was a great wound and the blood running from it, such as you had. But this was in everything. And I did nothing. Nothing but try to hide from the horror of dying."
Oof.
So he looked up with a great effort of his will and met his companion's eyes. Sparrowhawk reached out and took his hand in a hard grasp, so that both by eye and by flesh they touched. He said Arren's true name, which he had never spoken.
Yeah, right.
So this is the first time. "Lebanon." Again he said it. "Lebanon, this is, and thou art. There is no safety, and there is no end. The word must be heard in silence. There must be darkness to see the stars. The dance is always danced above the hollow place, above the terrible abyss." Arren clenched his hands and bent his forehead down till it pressed against Sparrowhawk's hand. "I failed you," he said. "I will fail you again and fail myself. I have not strength enough." "You have strength enough." The mage's voice was tender, but beneath tenderness was that same hardness that had risen in the depths of Arren's own shame and mocked him. "What you love, you will love. What you undertake, you will complete. You are a fulfiller of hope. You are to be relied on. But 17 years gives little armor against despair.
Yeah.
Consider, Arren, to refuse death is to refuse life." And there's the balance.
Right. Right.
Wow. So there's a lot here with understatement of the century. A lot here just sort of putting up Ged against Arren. And I'm just fascinated with the way she does this, because you have in the first book, you have Ged versus Nega Ged, right? Mm-hmm. Ged versus other Ged. And Ged has to sort of know himself. And then in the second book, you have Ged the mentor, and you have this strangely different plot where you have this person fighting fundamentalism within herself and finding her own identity again. And then now you have Ged almost looking into the past at a version of himself that perhaps he once was, and trying to ask himself, I think he's trying to ask himself, what would Ogian do, right? What would he say in this moment? How was I taken out of who I was? And how was I given the space to grow and the opportunity to grow? Because he never really forces Arren to do anything. He basically just
No.
encourages the good behavior, and with the bad behavior, he says, "Well, you'll do better next time." I think we talked about on The Bear recently how Richie having the opportunity to get out of the zone where people were just telling him that he's a jerk made him less of a jerk. The stories
Yep.
the way we describe people who look up to us helps them frame their own identity when they're interacting with us. And so Richie on The Bear being told he's a jerk reinforces that he's going to be a jerk. And here, Arren being told, you'll do better next time, helps him do better next time. And in the end, he does do better.
A personal anecdote, long time ago in a lifetime far, far away, there was a guy in our group of friends in our friend circle, motorcycle accident, head injury, rehabbed, came back. His personality was radically different. Prior to the accident, he was a very aggressive, rough person who was a lot of fun, but also kind of crazy, dangerous fun. And when he came back, he was much more kind and gentle and unassuming and whatnot. And we all didn't know how to relate to him. So we kept relating to him in the ways that we had been relating to him, which was a jerk and an asshole, pardon my French. And what happened 6-8 months later, he started acting like a jerk and an a-hole because that's how the dynamic between us went. And so,
you couldn't let him be who he had become.
Right. We related to him in his old self, in his old way.
Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah. And we didn't know any better. We were just like, wait, you have this name and you have this visage. This is who you are, who you have been to us in all this time.
Unless it was a scroll takeover.
That's a different show. Visit us over on
I was thinking the Lorax, unless,
Or I was thinking also of, John, you alluded to earlier about, getting a different name or being given a new name. Or a whole other thought line that I had recently in this, which is this idea of letting go of that which no longer serves us. Yeah. This is jumping ahead a little bit, but they leave Ged's staff on the beach because it's been spent. And Aaron's like, no, we got to go get it. That's your staff. That's your thing. This is, that's who you are, is this thing. And, he says, I leave it because I spent all my wizardry. And so that made me think about this whole idea of, as we move through life and as we face the challenges we face, we develop strategies and techniques and modalities and ways of being to help us survive life and to survive the circumstances of life. But then what happens is that we age and things change and are not the same. And if we then try to hold on to those strategies that worked when we were in our 20s and we're now in our 60s, doesn't go so well. we have to be able to accept change, and that takes a lot of power. And I think there's even a whole quote somewhere in here about the one true power is to accept.
I was just going to read it.
Well, I think that's a good time.
You carry on.
But just this idea that we have to let go. We can remember things and we can have mementos and all this kind of stuff. But if we suffering comes from attachment, and so the Buddhists say, and so if we're attached to our past and the things that no longer serve us in our future, then we're causing ourselves suffering by being that which we are no longer. And this goes to, again, these little, this isn't necessarily a moral teaching, but again, a philosophical teaching, a hint about how life can go if you think these thoughts, which is put down the things that no longer serve you. If it doesn't serve you where you are now, put it down. Because what's Ged going to do? Walk around with this dead staff that is nothing, and people go, oh, well, look, there's a mage, there's a wizard, he's got his staff, but he's not really anymore. It's gone.
Anymore.
And so he has the strength to accept that he has transformed, and that in that transformation that he needs to leave those things behind.
Somehow it's even sadder to me that he leaves Lookfar behind.
Yes.
On the beach of Celador, and there it stays forever. But this comes when they're talking about the effect that Cobb had on Arren, and they're talking about what is a good man. Is it someone who has no darkness in him? No, look again, because that's not any of us. We all have that same weakness.
Yep.
And it's very end of Lord of the Rings too, right? I mean, Ged returns having saved the world to a world where he no longer belongs. Yeah, although he does get to say in his little shire.
Yes.
But he says that the voice that Arren was hearing, Arren thought it was Cobb's voice, and he says, it was his, and it was yours. How could he speak to you across the seas but in your own voice? How is it that he calls to those who know how to listen, the mages and the makers and the seekers who heed the voice within them? How is it that he does not call to me? It is because I will not listen. I will not hear that voice again. You were born to power, Arren, as I was, power over men, over men's souls. And what is that but power over life and death? You are young. You stand on the borders of possibility, on the Shadowland, in the realm of dream, and you hear the voice saying, come. But I, who am old, who have done what I must do, who stand in the daylight facing my own death, the end of all possibility, I know there is only one power that is real and worth the having, and that is the power not to take, but to accept.
Yeah. Right there.
And then later on, he's watching Arren as he sleeps in the boat. And Ged, the Archmage, says aloud to the sleeping boy or to the empty wind, I have found none to follow in my way, none but thee. And thou must go thy way, not mine. Yet will thy kingship be in part my own. For I knew thee first. I knew thee first. They will praise me more for that in after days than anything I did of magery. If there will be after days. For first we two must stand upon the balance point, the very fulcrum of the world. And if I fall, you fall, and all the rest. For a while. No darkness lasts forever, and even then there are stars. Oh, but I should like to see thee crowned in Havnor, and the sunlight shining on the tower of the sword and on the ring we brought for thee from Atuan, from the dark tombs, Tanar and I, before ever thou wast born. He laughed then, and turning to face the north, he said to himself in the common tongue, a goatherd to set the heir of Mordred on his throne. Will I never learn?
All right, I think we should discuss that journey quickly. After crossing the mountains of Pain, the dragon Callison brings them to Roke. Arren, having fulfilled the prophecy of the last king of Earthsea, remains on Roke, and will be crowned as King LeGuin to reunite the Isles of Earthsea. Ged returns to the forest on his home island of Gaunt.
Yeah, the two endings are two legends. So this is an in-world thing. This isn't her
okay.
being indecisive. It's, we tell our stories about our heroines and our heroes, and different people tell different stories and so forth. So again, it's the sort of thing of, well, some say that, he did this or that, and others say that he did this or that.
I just like Ged versus Wild kind of being the ending of this. Man versus Wild. That old reality show where you just drop somebody in the wilderness. And they have to you give them a pocket knife and they got to survive. But no, I mean it's kind of interesting. He really wanted to escape Gaunt as a kid, right? And now he's ready to go home.
He is done with doing, which is a great line.
Does he still have family on Gaunt? That's my question.
Good question.
That's what we'll find out.
Oh, okay.
With the next book. I don't think that's a spoiler.
I do love that the doorkeeper gets the last word on the island.
I love the doorkeeper.
Yeah, he's done with doing. He goes home. It was so perfect, and again, just goes to that really beautiful story construction. I did catch, I think the line comes a little bit earlier, but there is, I alluded to this before. He says, I would see Tenar.
Yes.
And
that was an interesting moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, because I still think he, at some point, it was in love with Tenar. And I don't remember Teanu because I read it once a long time ago. But yeah, there's some connectivity there. So
hold that thought.
Okay, will do.
Can I back up just a little to...
Of course.
After thanks to Arren, because Arren is the one who brings Ged out in the end, really.
Yeah.
And finds the stone of pain in his pocket.
Yes.
And then he smiled a smile both somber and joyous, knowing for the first time in his life, alone, unpraised, and at the end of the world, victory. And then a new old dragon appears. Sobriost, said the dragon like a January wind through frozen reeds. Let my lord be. He has saved us all, and doing so has spent his strength and maybe his life with it. Let him be. So Arren spoke, fiercely and with command. He had been overawed and frightened too much. He had been filled up with fear, and he had gotten sick of it and would not have it anymore. He was angry with the dragon for its brute strength and size, its unjust advantage. He had seen death. He had tasted death, and no threat had power over him. The old dragon Kalesin looked at him from one long, awful golden eye. There were ages beyond ages in the depth of that eye. The morning of the world was deep in it. Though Arren did not look into it, he knew that it looked upon him with profound and mild hilarity.
I love that so many of our quotes are overlapping here. We're all hitting the same thing. So
how could they not be?
It's plain in her writing where the this sort of truth to power elements are that, if we're all hitting the same notes, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
The Stone of Pain was such an interesting little device, and for me, it really goes back to that thing of letting go that of which no longer serves us, but at the same time, can we hold on to our pain? Because pain is a teacher, pain is a guide, pain can keep us alive. Fear of pain can actually help aid in our survival. Mm-hmm. But if we fixate on the pain, if we don't heal the pain or have a context for the pain, then it's left open and it can manifest in all kinds of different ways, either in our outward actions towards other or our actions towards ourselves. And, that Lebanon is able to look at the stone with a kind of fondness. He's whole with it. He's whole in himself. And he can keep that pain as a memory of this journey and what it cost them to heal this world's hurt. And again, just going into that wholeness of being. And when you're whole like that, you have potential, and your potential is X factor, whatever, infinity, right? And that allows him to, again, become a ruler, and be responsible, not to rule, not to have dominion over people, but to be responsible to the world, to help the world function the way that it needs to function. And this little pain at the stone that he's keeping, to remind him of the effort and the journey that they went through. It's just a really lovely touch.
I see that stone as a symbol of his acceptance.
Yes, absolutely.
Tying back into when Ged said, the greatest power is to accept.
Yeah. Yep.
And Arren had accepts
his pain.
He might die. He'd accepted the pain of the journey. And that's why he felt that triumph.
And then when he sees death and tasted it, it has no threat over him, no threat, right, a power over him, is because he's not living in fear. He's not holding on. He's not suffering because he's holding on to the absent, like, oh, I have to avoid my pain. I say, no, I lived it. I was there. I've got it. I'm whole. I can suffer. I can go through anything. I can look eye to eye with the oldest dragon there is and yell at him. Bugger off, you big dragon. Leave my master alone.
Because he was fed off. He was fed up
so
with it all.
great.
I know you're bigger than I am.
I'm
Just
gonna
back
beat
off.
We broke Arren.
Just back off. And then we see Ged kneel a second time,
Well,
as he predicted.
yeah, that's another Lord of the Rings comparison that I have, which is when Aragorn kneels to the hobbits
in the films.
In the films, and it just that this acknowledgement of an honoring of the sacrifice and the impact of the journey and what it's done to you and what it means for other people.
I'm going to say, I think that Tolkien would have liked him kneeling to the hobbits in the film.
You think so?
I like it. I like it. I think it fits the vibe of it. This is not a Lord of the Rings podcast, and I'm gonna leave that there.
Well, I think it's because of the way that they envisioned Aragorn in the films. It definitely fits that interpretation of Aragorn.
Sure, yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on this section?
Yeah, many thoughts. We got to go. We got to talk about a little bit of Cobb's origin story. We were just talking about some of this in the MCU stuff. I'm calling the MCU as its own genre now, a subgenre. But there's in superhero stories, we talk a lot about origin stories. Yep. And so Cobb, that he, was created by Ged. And here's another impact of Ged's hubris and his ego, and he challenges him and say, well, you call the dead to you, will you come with me to their home? And then that's actually the origin story for Cobb to learn the magic of Palm and all of these things. So that Ged is the source and, resolver of this is so interesting. Again, coming around back to this man, this goat herder from Gaunt.
What did you both think of the fact that Ged was using Arren as a stalking horse?
Ooh, yeah, I wanted to talk about that too.
Meaning that he was following Arren's fear
to
find the source because he could not hear it, as he later tells Arren. And
he chooses not to hear it.
Right.
And so therefore he can't find it.
Right.
And if he starts to hear it, then, he's going to get in trouble. But then to use Arren, there are parts where Arren is really pissed off at him and has doubt and his faith is faltering in this guy. He's like, what am I doing here? He's dragging me around to the ends of the earth, and I've got this crazy guy in my boat with me, and he's going to kill us both. And it really, isn't there a whole quote too? I'm sure there about. Didn't we already say the quote too about him following his youth? And John, did you read that one? I thought. Anyway,
I don't think so.
Okay.
Listen to me, Arren. You will die. You will not live forever. Nor will any man, nor anything. Nothing is immortal. But only to us is it given to know that we must die. And that is a great gift. The gift of selfhood. For we have only what we know we must lose, what we are willing to lose. That selfhood, which is our torment, and our treasure, and our humanity, does not endure. It changes. It is gone. A wave on the sea. Would you have the sea grow still and the tide cease to save one wave, to save yourself? Would you give up the craft of your hands and the passion of your heart and the light of the sunrise and sunset to buy safety for yourself, safety forever? That is what they seek to do on Wathort and Lorbonnery and elsewhere. That is the message that those who know how to hear have heard. By denying life, you may deny death and live forever. And this message I do not hear, Arren, for I will not hear it. I will not take the counsel of despair. I am deaf, I am blind. You are my guide. You, in your innocence and your courage, in your unwisdom and your loyalty, you are my guide. The child I send before me into the dark, It is your fear, your pain I follow.
Yeah, is that messed up, or is that? I mean, is it
I
informed
mean, he
consent?
frames it pretty messed up too. You are the child I send before me into the dark. Boy.
Yeah.
Can I read the rest of it?
Yeah, sure. I see. Marilyn doesn't like the brevity of my quotes.
No, I love that you gave that whole chunk. That was wonderful. But this is partially in mitigation of what we were just talking about. How is this not child abuse? You had thought me harsh to you, Arren. You never knew how harsh. I use your love as a man burns a candle, burns it away to light his steps. And we must go on. We must go on. We must go all the way. We must come to the place where the sea runs dry and joy runs out. The place to which your mortal terror draws you. Where is it, my lord? I do not know. I cannot lead you there, but I will come with you. The mage's gaze on him was somber, unfathomable. But if I should fail again and betray you, I will trust you, son of Mord. Then both were silent.
Yeah, so that's what I mean is, this affirmation of Arren as a loyal, capable person helps Arren become that person by the end of the book. And yes, it is low-key child abuse. Yeah.
He asks Arren asks the important question. Because Gerd has just said, to be oneself is a rare thing and a great one. To be oneself forever, is that not better still? Arren looks straight at Sparrowhawk. You would say to me that it is not better. But tell me why. I was a child when I began this voyage, a child who did not believe in death. You think me a child still, but I have learnt something. Not much maybe, but something. I have learnt that death exists and that I am to die. But I have not learned to rejoice in the knowledge, to welcome my death or yours. If I love life, shall I not hate the end of it? Why should I not desire immortality? Why should you not desire immortality? How should you not? Every soul desires it, and its health is in the strength of its desire. But be careful. You are one who might achieve your desire. And then? And then this, a false king ruling, the arts of man forgotten, the singer tongueless, the eye blind. This blight and plague on the lands, the sore we seek to heal. There are two, Arren, two that make one. The world and the shadow, the light and the dark. The two poles of the balance. Life rises out of death. Death rises out of life. In being opposite, they yearn to each other. They give birth to each other and are forever reborn. And with them, all is reborn. The flower of the apple tree, the light of the stars. In life is death. In death is rebirth. What then is life without death? Life unchanging, everlasting, eternal. What is it but death? Death without rebirth.
And Feanor's over here like, come on, man.
And that image of the individual as one wave on the sea, that is remarkably Buddhist.
Right.
That is one of the best images I've ever found for understanding the Buddhist concept of, the rising and the falling. The self returning to the sea. It's not that it gets annihilated; it's just that it rejoins.
Right. And it's interesting to take that religion comment a little bit further, which is, when they're in the land of the dead in the dry lands, the potter wheels still, the looms are empty, the stove cold, no voice ever sang. This is not a Christian or I don't want to even just pigeonhole it there, but it's not a promised land. It's not a land of, hey, if you do some cool stuff in this world, you'll go to this place that's even better. This is not that. This is, and when he gives Cobb back his eyes and a name, I assume, and he just goes up, he walks off and that's it.
And dies.
Yeah, in the land of death.
In the land of death. Notice that it is the dry land.
Yes, the dry lands.
back to what I was saying before, the sea is life because it is ever changing and ever moving. Water moves.
That's right.
Water gives life. And this whole concept of the dry land and the place, she's going to come back to this.
Okay.
In the subsequent books.
Cool.
In a very interesting way.
We've got some feedback too that's going to come up that touches on this, some stuff around what happens, things going wrong in the world and when people hold on to stuff. I have my 3 last real quick Lord of the Ring comparisons really fast.
Go for it.
You get 2.
No, all three.
In
3
place of
the
Lokfar's mast, a tree grew with great arching arms of foliage. Swans guided the boat, swooping on strong winds before it. Far ahead, over the barrel green sea, shone a city of white towers. Then he was in one of those towers, climbing the steps, which spiraled upwards, running up them lightly and eagerly. So I just thought trees, white trees, towers. I
was getting some Alqualande there,
Yeah, totally. Swans, the whole thing. So that was that felt just a lot of Tolkien stew for me. Ged, I think, really becomes Ged the White in this book. At some point, his hair gets singed and let it be shut, he said, and, light blazing up from his hands and his face as if he were star fallen on Earth in that endless night. So that really made me think of the Astari coming down from the heavens.
And it was a good thing he was only mostly dead.
Right.
Back in that scene.
And then my last one, the doom of man. But only to us is given to know that we must die. And that is a great gift, the gift of selfhood. A living body suffers pain. It grows old, dies. Death is the price we pay for life. So I thought that the whole doom of man thing was baked into to this story, which is also very dualistic in terms of this particular Eastern philosophies and dualism.
Well, Tolkien was quoted in a letter as saying that his Lord of the Rings was a book about death, which is simply to say that it is a book written by a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think this is the big question that people wrestle with. 2 more little Tolkien references. Lebanon.
Yeah.
Also sounds very much like a particular region in Lord of the Rings. In the southern parts. And Celador. They brought this up in the Tolkien biopic.
Which was a terrible movie.
Interestingly enough. And there were some gems. There were some gems. I loved the conversation with the professor while walking on Addison Walk, because that just touched so many golden moments for Tolkien. It was really quite special. But that whole scene when they're sitting in the tea shop and before they throw the sugar lumps over the balcony people, Tolkien says that, words have beautiful meanings, but they also have beautiful sounds that have nothing to do with their meanings. And the example that he picked was the word cellar door, which is taken directly again from one of his letters saying most people would agree that the phrase cellar door is a beautiful sounding phrase. So the movie runners took that and turned it into this whole thing where he's explaining this to Edith and she says, "You're kidding." And he says, "No, Celador." She said, "Well, tell me a story of Celador." And so he goes off into this whole thing. So I don't know if LeGuin had read that letter at that point. The letters hadn't been published at that point, so probably not. But it's just interesting that she picked Celador, which is so much like Celador. And then the biopic comes around and picks it right up and runs with it.
Right.
The least realistic thing about that scene is that Tolkien finishes the story in one conversation.
Fair point. Well, it is an adaptation.
So, speaking of feedback.
Yes.
We need to get there. We need to bring in some voices.
Let's do it.
Ramsey, via email, says, "Hiya, Lorehounds. Stumbled upon your brilliant podcast whilst looking for Earthsea podcasts and was blown away by the many amazing takes and insights." Hey, thanks. I appreciate it, Ramsey.
That's great.
Your interpretation of Ged's shadow as a kind of manifestation of his dark side was interesting because I've always thought of Ged's shadow more in the Jungian and Buddhist sense. The shadow as whatever one has rejected or chosen to unsee about themselves because it's unacceptable or shameful. The self we hide from others. The less it's embodied in an individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. It's not necessarily a good versus evil thing, but a shame thing. Freedom comes when we can confront the ugly parts of ourselves instead of running or hiding and deal with them. In Zen, the shadow is the ego, where fear, anger, and attachment comes from, which initially makes one think that your shadow is your enemy. But to attain enlightenment is to understand that the shadow is not your enemy. There is no enemy. The ego is your friend. Like pain is a feeling that signals a problem, so is the ego, which signals a spiritual problem. Usually when we recognize what triggers us to act in fear, it can be healed with self-acceptance and love. Big fan of the podcast, and I hope you cover all the stories. There's an amazingly beautiful Earthsea short story that is only collected in the Books of Earthsea collection that tells of Ged's passing, and Ursula K. LeGuin died not long after it was published. Let's go through this one first before we go to Ramsey's follow-up. I like this. I like this idea that it's shame and not evil, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It reminds me sort of the way that Le Guin describes dragons, right? Neither good nor evil, just they are what they are.
Right. Immensely powerful.
But the dragons are very sure of themselves, right? They are very comfortable being who they are. And that's what allows them to sort of transcend this morality of humans in this world.
You can't imagine a dragon feeling shame, can you?
Right.
No.
Right. Whereas Ged did feel shame for a very long time in book one. And I think he sort of moves past that after book one. I think he has some reservations still, but he largely learns to accept his faults by book two.
And he is even refers to his shame when he's talking about Cobb at one point, saying, that I even called upon, I forget her name, one of the characters.
Elfarin.
Yeah, Elfarin. And he was ashamed that he had done that and done that to her, called her from the dead to, for a mere parlor trick. Do either of you know the parable of the ox, the Buddhist parable of the ox?
Yeah.
So the idea here is that a herdsman is missing ox, and it's sort of mirrors a journey towards enlightenment where the ox is your ego, and that when you're looking for it, you're looking for the signs of it, you're trying to understand its patterns and its ways. And then when you find it, you've got to kind of make friends with it because it's a big wild animal. It's very dangerous and powerful. But then when you can make friends with it and make peace with it, then you can join with it and ride it, and you can contribute to each other's lives. And then your possibilities become manifold because you have this big thing you can ride around on that's powerful and strong and doesn't tire as easily and can get you through hard parts and take you to new heights and, all of this kind of stuff. It's a really great encapsulation. And I think goes to what Ramsey is saying here is that if you can join with your ego, then it's your ally, as opposed to your ego being a bad thing, which it can be. And we see when an ego is out of balance, like Cobb's ego is out of balance, it leads to ruin.
Right. Right.
And in my experience, it's almost always shame that throws the balance off.
Right. Right.
And then leads to subsequent
not
disorder.
Good things happening.
There's a great book by James Gilligan, who is the husband to Carol Gilligan, who we've talked about on this podcast before. And he is a psychiatrist, and he worked with prisoners in basically a high security situation where a lot of violent crimes and a lot of violence within the prisons. And he was brought in to help run the psychiatric department at one facility. He ended up running every one in the state. I think it was Massachusetts, but I could be wrong.
Wow.
And because he got the state the state total of deaths in a year in prisons to 0, where it had been very high. And the reason that I bring this up is he wrote a book with someone about Shakespeare and violence, and how shame and guilt are two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That create different problems. And the answer to both is love for yourself and for others. But shame, and I might be reversing this, so please just read the book if you want the full story. But shame is basically love for yourself and anger towards others, because it's about the perception of others. Guilt is you have love for others and hatred for yourself for what you did to them. And because both of those have hatred in part of them and anger in part of them, they will always lead to violence in the end.
The version I've heard and that I've resonated with most strongly is that guilt is about something that I've done. Shame is about who I am. With guilt, you have the opportunity to quote unquote come back through apology, through
reparation,
somehow
healing,
reparation, making it right, and so forth.
Right.
But if you believe that what you are is bad, wrong, evil, whatever, that's a really tough place to come back from. And it requires exactly what you said, John. It requires a great deal of self-love and self-compassion. And this is where I sometimes get uncomfortable with this conversation about, you have to subdue the ego is better. No, not at all.
Right.
And for years I'd hear that and I think, well, could I just, have a healthy ego for a while first before I haul off and kill it? I mean,
right.
I think we've got this out of proportion here.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that goes to the parable of the ox. That parable says, make friends with your ego, make peace with it, tame it, make it not a wild beast, but, something that you can work with, and then it becomes a powerful ally.
Right.
There's another quote in the book. We've thrown a lot of quotes out this time around, but I've given my love to what is worthy of love. Is that not the kingdom of imperishing spring?
Yes.
So you, again, to your point, John, that, the love is the wellspring, and but not stupid love, not infatuation, but
true compassionate love.
Exactly the words I was going to say. Compassionate love.
And love is all you need. The Beatles.
Compassion is such a hugely important word, and again, largely drawn from the Buddhists, but it's having a comeback for other religions as well. There is a lovely link to article in Tricycle about the 10 pictures of the ox, and I've just sent the link to you both.
Okay.
So maybe we can talk about putting it in the show notes.
Yeah, this is the whole parable of the ox in encapsulated.
Ramsey has an additional comment saying, reminds me of the pickle the world is in right now with billionaires and big tech. Nature is not unnatural. This is not a writing of the balance, but an upsetting of it. There is only one creature who can do that. A man? Arren said, tentative. We men. How? By an unmeasured desire for life. For life? But isn't it wrong to want to live? No. But when we crave power over life, endless wealth, unassailable safety, immortality, then desire becomes greed. And if knowledge allies itself to that greed, then comes evil. Then the balance of the world is swayed and ruin weighs heavy in the scale.
I think this really goes to the context of in which LeGuin was writing these stories as well. For her time to see the war machine in full tilt and political violence and assassination and all of these kinds of things. And it's not unlike what a situation we're in right now, where it kind of feels like the earth is burning, and why? Because of greed. Why greed? Because they want power over life. They want, there are people who have insatiable desires for profit and growth.
Who have substituted wealth as a sense of self.
Yeah.
It becomes a protection. Can I read LeGuin's afterword that talks about this?
I was just a real quick comment on that too. That when they go to the dry lands and there is that, well or riverbed or whatever it is, that's just swallowing up the world. That's that emptiness, that hollowness, that nullness inside of rapacious greed. It can never be filled. How rich can you be? How many billions of dollars do you need to be satisfied? You have a mega yacht. You can fly anywhere in the world you want to fly to. Okay, great. To what end? What are you doing with that? And when is enough enough?
That reminds me of what I hear in that is they're trying to fill the hole with the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
That most of the time, that hole that we sense in the center of ourselves is a me-shaped hole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it cannot be filled by anything other than self. And initially that sounds self-centered, selfish, whatever, but it's, I think, the only way to that healthy ego.
And that's what Ged did, was he filled his self with his self, right?
Right. And so he was not attracted by filling it because he knew he was enough.
I like that way that you phrase that. He was not attracted to the message of Cobb. He was not attracted to that. It's uninteresting to me because I have myself. I am whole within myself. What more do I need?
But
and
a young
he
Ged probably would have been attracted to the message of Cobb.
Yes.
Oh, and did.
And
have
created
that
Cobb.
Emptiness in himself. Yeah. And of course, it also is important to point out that this is the Archmage we're talking about, who, is probably the most powerful human being in that world at that point. So he really doesn't have a lot to be afraid of.
No. I mean, I'm Cobb smacked just thinking about it.
Oh, you've been holding that one, haven't you? You've been waiting for the moment. So here's what LeGuin says. So the book's dark themes of loss and betrayal took shape. So Gerd and Arren had to come to Hort Town, and drug addiction and slavery are seen for the first time in the archipelago. Evil in this book has an immediate, ugly human shape, because I saw evil not as some horde of foreign demons with bad teeth and super weapons, but as an insidious and ever-present army in my own daily life in my own country. The ruinous irresponsibility of greed. We are frequently told that greed for endless increase of material goods is natural and universal, as is greed for endless life. We are all supposed to agree that you can't be too rich or live too long. The desire to live is certainly natural and universal, since it's the basic directive of living creatures. Once born, our job and our desire is to try to stay alive. But is that the same thing as desire to stay alive forever, to be immortal? Or is it just that we can't imagine it not being? So we invent an endless existence called immortality. Knowing that everything on Earth has an end, we know the afterlife can't be on Earth. So it has to be somewhere else. A totally other place where the living can't come and where nothing can ever change. To me, the imagery of the various afterlives and underworlds, the heavens and hells, appears marvelous and powerful. But I can't believe in any of them except as I, quote, believe, unquote, in any imaginative creation as a hint, an indication, a sign of something more than can be said or shown. The idea of individual immortality and endless ego existence is more dreadful to me than the idea of letting go the self in death to rejoin shared eternal being. I see life as a shared gift, received from others and passed on to others, and living and dying as one process in which lies both our suffering and our reward. Without mortality to purchase it, how can we have the consciousness of eternity? I think the price is worth paying. So in this book, Ged goes down into the dreary realm of the dead, knowing that he will not come back from it, and willing to pay that price. But even wizards don't know everything. He's wrong. He does come back, saved by his young companion's innocence and strength. Both of them are transformed by the terrible passage. The boy Arren returns as the man LeGuin, and Gerd has lost not his life, but his power to do magic. The Archmage is no mage now. What may be implied about Gerd's future in that loss, that change, is just hinted at by the doorkeeper when he says, quote, "He is done with doing. He goes home."
David and I are in a staring contest after that one.
Well, thank you, Ramsey. We hope to hear some more feedback from you. And for anyone who wants to send us feedback and share something, there's so much that we didn't cover in the review of the second half of this book. We could have spent a lot more time. So do send us an email, book@thelorehounds.com, or visit us on our website, thelorehounds.com, and you can go to the contact page there, and there you can leave us a voicemail or use a contact form. Either way, things will get to us. But it's been quite a read. This has just been such an incredible journey. This is sort of the 3 core books that she originally, the first trilogy, right? Now we've got the second trilogy ahead of us. And all of that ultimately is made possible by you, our listeners. Thank you very much for continuing to listen. I'm sure even if we had maybe 15 listeners, we might continue this. I don't know. But the fact that there are so many people who are resonating with this, it means a lot to us, and specifically to our Patreon subscribers, and particularly our Lore Master subscribers. So Samartian, Cyrus, Mark H., Michael G., Michelle E., David W., Brian P., Nick W., SC, Peter OH, Bettina W., Adam S., Nancy M., Lavinia T., Duve 71, Brian 8063, Frederick H., Sarah L., Gareth C., Eric F., Matthew M., Sarah M., DJ Miwa, Joyce E., Andra B., and Kwang Yu. Thank you all for your continued support, because many of you have been with us for quite a while, and you stay subscribed, and that means that we must be doing something right. So it means a lot to us as we hit our 1-year podcasting anniversary. You'll all be getting a copy of the sticker. I was just looking at mailing envelopes today, paid the final invoice. So production is happening, and we're going to get those out to you guys by the end of. And again, anybody who's subscribed before August 1st, before the clock strikes 1, you can get a sticker, and you can help us with all of the activities and efforts that it takes to put on a regular podcast. John, programming for July and our affiliates.
Yeah, so let's do our affiliates first. We've got Elysia just finishing up Silo. We were just on her podcast for a game show edition of Will Shift Dust.
That was a lot of fun.
Where we voted on our nominees for different categories. There was some speed round trivia, and it was
love her
fun.
Creativity.
She had sound effects, guys.
Yeah,
so definitely check it out.
Wow.
You can find the link to that in the show notes. The Dune books are starting up on her feed in August. But in the meantime, I know she just launched her own Patreon with a book club for the Will Shift Dust series, the Silo series. So if you want to go support her, feel free to go do that. Properly Howard Film Reviews is about to be back in full swing mid-August. They just did Howard the Duck the last week of June. We just recorded with them a podcast on Dune Part 1, the 2021 film. And that was a great conversation. We had a lot of laughs. We talked about Willy Wonka and more.
And that was your first time seeing the Dune.
It was. It was.
Oh, really?
I've been doomed.
Well,
the Dune of man. But yeah, they've got a lot of great stuff coming. White Man Can't Jump, RoboCop, The Wolfman, The Wicker Man, a lot of stuff coming. So subscribe to their feed again in the show notes.
I think the theme of this season is remakes.
Yeah.
So these are all films that are remakes of them. And there's the Properly Howard thing. It's the rating scale. Is the film properly Howard, or is it a Howard +3 or a -4? So
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard, that is.
Ron Howard.
Yeah, Ron Howard.
Steve and Anthony have a lot of fun. They
do.
It's so great to have them with us.
Yeah. So, as far as us, because we still make podcasts, even if we support other podcasts, Marilyn, you're going to be joining us for a recording tomorrow on Silmarillion stories. We're doing 2 chapters. We are covering the Silmarils and the unrest of the Noldor, as well as of the darkening of Valinor. So 2 important stories for the origin of the Noldor and all their nonsense, because boy, do they have a lot of nonsense for the rest of this book.
I was reading today. They get up to some nonsense.
They sure do. I mean, the Noldor, what would Feanor do? Let's all ask ourselves that question and then do the opposite.
Do the opposite.
Then do the opposite.
Yes,
don't worry. David, you've been doing Secret Invasion with John and Elysia.
It's been going well. The interesting thing about the Secret Invasion show is that the subtext and all of the stuff that's going on below the surface is fascinating. It's really interesting. They're dealing with a whole bunch of real world circumstances head on, and yet on top, some of the film some of the production is it's not bad, it's not great, but underneath there's some really compelling story stuff. So it's I think it's a good addition to the MCU overall.
Well, as Tolkien would say, we read a bad paper and had a great discussion.
Exactly.
That's that podcast. That's that podcast.
That's truth.
And of course, our flagship show right now, Foundation. We just started season 2. We're doing full coverage of it. We're back doing full coverage, scene by scene. We are talking all the details. We're talking naked fight scenes, and we're talking. Oh yeah, Marilyn, I saw you look up. Like what's going on there? It's happening. It's happening.
Lee Pace.
Lee Pace
showing us his moves.
Good-looking guy. Thranduil in the Hobbit movies,
Yes,
if you know
yes.
him. And all the politics and the crises coming and awkward mother-daughter relationships. It's all there. It's all there. And I hope you'll join us for it, because it looks like season 2 is going to be a lot better than season 1. We have a lot more coming. I could talk about what we're doing forever, but it is 2 hours and 22 minutes into this recording. And I think that you all can find the rest of these on our Discord server in the community updates tab. So on that note, it's been a pleasure talking Earthsea with you two. Thank you both. Thank you for everyone listening, and we will see you for Tahanu.
Thank you so much, folks.
The Lorehounds podcast is produced and published by The Lorehounds. You can send questions and feedback and voicemails at thelorehounds.com/contact. Get early and ad-free access to all Lorehounds podcasts at patreon.com/thelorehounds. Any opinions stated are ours personally and do not reflect the opinion of or belong to any employers or other entities. Thanks for listening.